Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the World Chess Championship 2021 between Magnus Carlsen and Jan Nepomniachtchi. Now, this is an interesting round because couple of days ago, there was obviously a rest day on the Monday. Today is Tuesday. Jan got into a crazy situation where after losing just one game in this match, he made a completely unbelievable, uncharacteristic blunder in a game that he had absolutely no business losing in the first place, and he lost it. And so now, obviously, a lot of us are just writing it off. They're like, it's done. This match is over. But I had a feeling that Jan would be coming with a game plan, and he would kind of change things up, and he did. Not only did he play a completely different first move than he'd been playing, he also came in decked out in a super fresh haircut. Like, my man had no man bun. He had like a high top fade, like a number 2 fade. He had like a comb over. I mean, my man was looking like a boss. I mean, he looked like he wasn't even playing the World Championship. He was going to go be an actor in a movie. The problem is he is playing a World Championship. What are you going to do? Magnus plays e6. Obviously, you don't know what Magnus is going to play because you haven't played c4 yet. I mean, will he play the reverse Sicilian? Magnus decides to be ultra solid. Considering that Jan has to overcome a 2-game deficit in 6 games, Magnus is going to let him come to him. G3. And we have a position that's known as potentially a Neo-Catalan. And it's called a Neo-Catalan because if black just plays very traditional moves like this, if white plays d4, of course, we are in a Catalan. But if white plays, for example, something like b3, this is called a Neo-Catalan because white just doesn't play the traditional move d4. Chess gets played. So, but Magnus doesn't actually allow any of this and immediately plays the move d4, which is really rare to just shove this pawn forward. It's not necessarily bad. It's just rare. Usually black will wait, like knight f6, knight f3, castles, bishop e7, and then and only then play d4. And when you play d4, you are more often than not going to support it with another pawn, because how else are you going to support your center if not with other pawns, right? That's like very common. So we have knight f3, and now comes surprise number 2, not c5, but knight c6. This breaks many rules, one of which is don't put your knights in front of your c-pawns, especially when you're playing with the queen's pawn, right? When your knight is on c6 like this, it can very often be a target of a queenside pawn storm, like b4, b5, which is what white wants anyway. In a position where white is suffering like this kind of spatial disadvantage in the center, white is going to try to take space on the queen side, but also break in the center with the move e3 upon finishing development with the bishop on g2 and short castle. And so this is a super non-traditional way of trying to hold the position together, and if black has a chance, black will then take the center with the e-pawn as well, even though black already played it to e6. And this is just the way it works at this level. That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to take as much of the center as possible, even if you're losing a little bit of time. So castles, and here comes, to my understanding, surprise number 3. But in conjunction with these two moves, it's not a surprise, but it's kind of like a culmination of surprises, and it's the move bishop c5. The reason why this is so odd is because this setup doesn't make sense unless it's in the hands of a guy like Magnus Carlsen or just really strong grandmasters. Why? You're not supposed to just put your pieces like this in the center where they will most likely become targets. If your opponent can just walk up to you with pawns like e3, like, getting this knight to d2 once the pawn is up, and then b3 or e4 to hit the bishop, that generally doesn't work. If it did, everyone would play this way. But if you already look at the database, I haven't found a single engine game, and this is already move 5, which is pretty rare. Human games are like less than 0.05% at master level. So d3, knight f6, knight d2, I mean, kind of like normal stuff. Now, it's kind of interesting to note, Jan really should start with knight d2 to go to b3, because if Jan plays a3, we all know what Magnus is going to play. This is very common in these kinds of positions. To stop b4, you play a5, and then if you play knight d2, still looking for knight b3, I take the center, and by the time you've gotten seemingly everything what you've wanted, which is you've kicked out my bishop, and now you're ready to play e3, I'm arriving with the move a4, and that's a serious problem for white, because white has to just leave. Like, white just cannot do anything about this. And if white wants to prevent the move a4 by playing a4 themselves, that is fine, but now you completely surrender all dark square control on the queen side, right? So you're gonna have c4 and a4, and this just doesn't look like it makes much sense, because black center is actually very well held together, and even if you do, like for example, castles and play e3, this is not that much of an accomplishment, because black also just has good control of everything. So it actually is kind of important the way you develop your pieces here. So knight d2, Magnus still plays a5. This is important. I suppose, you know, he can also castle, but maybe he didn't like something there. Maybe he didn't like knight b3 and this. So since he knows that the knight will be arriving on b3, he plays a5 so that he always has the opportunity to play a4, but we have e3. Magnus here takes, we have bishop takes, 10 moves have gone by, and Jan Nepomniachtchi is blitzing everything. Magnus is down maybe 30 minutes on the clock. So they get 2 hours to start. Magnus has about maybe 80 minutes at this point. Jan has 112 minutes. He's up a lot on the clock, 30 to 40 minutes. However, I was listening to commentary, and even Anish Giri was saying that he actually suspects Magnus might still be in prep. I actually saw this theory on a lot of different parts of chess Twitter, and I was fascinated by that. Like, Magnus is lulling Jan into a state of believing that he has the upper hand. Absolutely fascinating. Sounds completely ludicrous to me, but to be honest, if it's true, I mean, these guys just are simply on another metasphere of the game of chess. I mean, stuff I completely don't even begin to understand. Now the question is, you know, what is next for Jan? Obviously, he's going to try to take as much of the center as he can. Like if something like castles, for example, but also Magnus is a little bit undeveloped, right? So maybe we're going to trade this bad knight for this knight. And just to show you what a nice position might look like here, knight d4 or bishop d4, just good development. Tough for black to develop the pieces. We'll play bishop c3, knight e5. We'll take the center. This pawn is just kind of not doing anything. So it's important that Magnus actually strikes backs now. And he plays knight g4. This is already potentially one of the most tense moments of the game. Here, Jan spends some time, I believe. Or maybe on the next move, Jan spent time. Jan here moves his bishop out of the way to c5. Like, you're not going to be able to trade bishop for knight with me. I would like to trade bishops instead. Just the concept of, I don't want to give you the bishop pair. Although, here, apparently, there was an interesting variation after knight g4, which is just to take the center, which is very interesting. And the point is that after something like knight e3, fe3, I mean, it's just a really imbalanced position. Just honestly, like really imbalanced. And a4 can happen, by the way. You can absolutely play a4 now. You can also play a4 here and get a position that, you know, looks something kind of like this. Yeah, I mean, this is just really odd. This is just a very strange position. So white has traded the dark squared bishop, so doesn't have the bishop pair, but has rebuilt on 5 of 7 squares of the dark squared pawn placement. White also has good center control, potential open file here for the rook when you move the knight, and like just to show you, this bishop is extremely strong. So, and then the queen can be extremely strong. So huge space advantage here for white, despite not having the 2 bishops. You know, black can start kind of instigating on the queen side with a3, but okay, you just kind of go here and, you know, you act like this is the crazy screaming person on the train in New York who has gangrene on their foot. True story. That happened to me once. Absolutely terrifying. Probably not as terrifying as having gangrene on your foot, but that was pretty terrifying. So, yeah, a lot of crazy stuff on the New York City subways. You just treat this pawn exactly like that. Just pretend they don't exist. So, really, I mean, d4 is definitely a possibility. It could have absolutely happened. It could have, I don't know what it would have led to, but Jan plays bishop c5, and now we have castles. And here we have Jan's first, like, officially long thought of the game. Jan can take on e7, and note that Magnus didn't take here because it's not checkers. So if it was checkers, he would have to take any of these 4 things, right? He just is like, you can come to me, boss. I'm good. Like, I'm going to keep making progress in my position rather than taking and giving you what you want. Maybe he'll do that later, though. So now we have a choice. You can take the bishop and play d4. You can just play d4. You can also play a4, preventing a4. But as we've talked about, you almost don't want to play a4, preventing a4, because if you play a4, preventing a4, then even though you've played a4, preventing a4, b4 is weak. Did you stick with me there? So b4 is weak. Maybe you don't want to weaken that. So Jan thinks for a while, plays d4. Now, Magnus will also play a4 or bishop takes bishop. Magnus does choose to play a4. Now Jan has to take the bishop. Why? Because if he plays knight d2, then after this, why did you do this to your pawns? Are you trying to create the pawn centipede? Like, let's not do that. So we have takes, and the knight goes to c5, trying to induce b6. It's a move that looks like you just offhand make it, but it's really bad because, number one, you hang your a-pawn. Knights are allowed to go backwards, in case you didn't know that. But also, you just drastically weaken this. So it's kind of like the knight, it's on c5, and it's actually totally safe, right? So Jan plays knight c5. And now it's up to Magnus to figure out what to do. So here, Matthew Sadler, who's a very strong English grandmaster, and he's the author of the book Game Changer, which is a book on chess engines, was talking about a simulation of a game that he ran live. And the engines were playing e5. The engine was playing e5 there. Stockfish was then playing rook e1. Black, which I forgot the name of the engine, it wasn't like a very well-known one, was playing like this. And they were both paralyzing each other's rooks. And yeah, this is like very spicy stuff. Now, I'm not going to spoil the computer move suggestion here because you're going to see it potentially suggested later in this game. But e5 is definitely a critical move. I mean, anytime you have three pieces kind of escorting a pawn up the middle, it's a move you always need to consider. Plus, white cannot play d5 because white would just hang the knight in one move. So e5 is a very natural looking move. But Magnus decides to deal with this because, again, if you're thinking that knight takes a4 is possible, it's not really. The combination of the queen infiltrating, the pawn coming in and kicking this knight, very unpleasant. But Magnus decides not to do anything and in the center and just clarify the situation with the a-pawn. Now, here, the very natural move is what? To me, the most natural looking move here is just to play b3. Like, I don't want to allow my opponent to have control of the a file. And therefore I kind of want to keep them blocked, and I like the structure. Now, what is the problem with playing b3? A3 is annoying, and knight b4 pressures a2 forever. So that's the problem. I'm saying my first instinct, 2 seconds, just play b3. Don't even take on a3. But taking on a3 is very much a possibility. However, here, the top suggestion by computers, and by the way, back in that other variation I was showing you, after rook d8, the same move, b4. You know, b4 looks completely ludicrous. So we're going to go to a3. Now the engine suggests b4. So there is no en passant, by the way, because the pawns need to be side by side, just in case you were confused. So b4 looks nuts. I mean, what happens if they just take? Well, apparently then you play rook b1 and you attack the knight on b4. The knight cannot take the next pawn because it's trapped. You can choose how you want to trap it, but it's trapped. It just dies. It dies. So queen c2 and the knight is trapped. So it can't take that pawn. If it retreats back to c6, then you take b7. And believe it or not, this is really good. This is actually really good for white. If black plays something kind of offhand, like rook b8, there's no threat being created at all, because this is protected. And you have this incredible move, knight a5. If knight takes knight, you take the rook. But if rook takes, then kabam. And this is taken with check while your own queen hangs, and then you win back the rook. And the rook is hanging. So beautiful tactics arising after b4. The best engine line after knight takes b4 is rook b1. Black has to go b6. You take, and now you don't take, allowing the queen to come. You play rook b5, which is absurd. That is an absurd move to see in advance. Point being that if black just continues gobbling, there is this. Oopsies. Crisscross applesauce, and black is going to be losing material. And so white is just going to take back on c5, maintain the two center pawns, and have a very nice position. So b4 has to be played. This is what the machines were screaming for here. Yeah, you know, I know some people who watch recaps or streams are like, I only watch this person because they don't use the engine. Humph. Yeah, if there was a human commentator who suggested the move before without reading an engine, like, God bless them. Because clearly Magnus hadn't seen it. Clearly Jan hadn't seen it. He didn't play before. Yeah, and even Anish Giri in his broadcast was like, yeah, here Stockfish suggests b4. So, I mean, b4 is an absurd move. Anish thought that Jan would take, and that's what Jan did. He took on a3. Why? Because when you start looking at this, and by the way, this goes to show you why I'm not super GM. I was like, I don't like this for white. This just looks like, you know, you're allowing the rook in. Could be just okay. I mean, this could be fine. This rook is all right, but you can always attack it and then try to advance your queen side. I just didn't really like the fact that my a2 pawn is always under fire. But, you know, Magnus doesn't take on d8. Sorry, he doesn't take on a3. He plays rook d8. In this position, just adding, you know, some pressure to the center, e5, because the queen is kind of on the same line here. And Magnus just saves this. He's like, dude, these pawns aren't going anywhere. I mean, they're just completely blocking each other. So, rook d8. And if you just take a look at this position, it's extremely difficult for Jan to make a move. Like, I mean, it's completely Jan's call of how to play this position, because his center's under fire, his queen side is a little bit delicate. How's he going to make forward progress with his pawns when his knight's in the way? So what does he do? He moves his knight back. Obviously, you got to get your knight out of line of sight of the queen. Now a3 is up for grabs, but Magnus just goes back to f6. That's really interesting. He like doesn't want his knight to be a target with any move, so he just goes back to f6. And again, the ball is the ball is back in Jan's court. I mean, knight f6. Like, what are you going to do? You can't defend this pawn. It's attacked twice. What do? You try to lurch forward with d5. Okay, I take. I mean, you try to lurch forward with 95. Okay, I take. You're going to lose your queen. So he has to come up with a game plan. He plays rook e1. Obviously, not a bad move. Very natural move. Brings the rook to the semi-open file. Okay, now Magnus finally does take on a3. And it's sort of the entire justification of his move a3 in the first place, which is why I wanted to play b3, which was not the best move. b4 was, but if you don't find b4, yeah, I mean, by the way, real quick, Jan spent 5 minutes on this move. 5 minutes. And he obviously had a lot of time. So, could he have found b4 with some more thought? Probably. Yes. Probably he could have. But that sort of seems to be the story of the match, right? So, but queen takes a3. Jan plays queen e2. Good move. Supporting the pawn. Preventing any infiltration with the queen. Supporting knight e5 and just getting out of the way of this. Engine eval. Magnus, by the way, doesn't know how to improve his position. I know sometimes you guys get confused when I say that, like, what does it mean to improve your position? It's just a move that doesn't overcommit, that scans the position properly for if there's any opponent threats, so you're not missing anything. So you just kind of make a move that doesn't weaken too much and only gives you good long-term prospects. This is one of those moves. This is actually one of those moments that you can just play h6 because, you know, your king is no more back rank problems. White has nothing immediate that they can punish you with, so h6. Knight f6 can even qualify, right? A move like bishop d7 is not clear if it's improving your position because you're blocking your rook, but this move doesn't affect anything. So Jan now has to think about what the game plan is. Rook d1 is always possible, like just going here and potentially preparing this, or a knight jump into the middle of the board. He probably needs to make forward progress with knight e5, but in order to do that, he's got to make sure that his queens and rooks are in the absolute perfect position, right? So he plays h4, which actually Vishy Anand was commending. Anand was saying that this is actually a very interesting move. First of all, no more back rank problems for this king, but furthermore, it can just be gaining space. It can be preparing g4, g5 in the future. In general, nowadays, it's sort of considered if you can play the move h4 without like severely weakening your position, it should be played. Now, on the flip side, if Magnus played h5, that's a pretty bad move. That is completely unnecessary. You can just absolutely create yourself a weakness. If you then play g6, you have dark squared liabilities, whereas this bishop kind of covers the light squares for white. So h4 is played. And now Magnus spent, I think, like 15 minutes and played bishop d7, which is exactly why I brought it up. The thing is, Magnus also cannot easily make a move, right? Like, Magnus, here, like, the computer, if you just let it runs out of ideas for black and just says to play queen a4. And then it says to repeat moves. The computer wants to just go outside and just smoke, like, 3 cigarettes and like, call it a day. All right? I mean, the computer's done. I mean, it's down 40% on its crypto, and it just wants a break. I let the machine run for a bit just to start to create. I mean, it's starting to come up with moves like rook a7. That's when you know that it's really tough, right? It's really, really tough to do something. But bishop d7 actually is trying to achieve something. It's weakening b7 temporarily, and it's anticipating, you know, white coming forward. So Magnus understands his opponent's match situation. He probably understands that rook d1, knight e5, these moves are coming, and they do. And now he plays bishop e8, just again, a really solid and annoying defensive move, rerouting the bishop to potentially a really passive spot, but supporting the c6 square. And if you take and go, ha ha, I've doubled your pawns, I'm so strong. Well, you've traded your really good bishop. Your queen side is still a liability, and I'm coming in on all angles. Like, your pawns just stand there, okay? You can play queen f3 and attack my weakness. I'm gonna use my weakness to bash you over the head. If you take with the knight, you lose your queen. If you take with a pawn, again, why would you do this to your pawns? I mean, queen b4, and it's open season on the pawns, right? Now, look at this threat. Bang, 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 right? The queen now will take the rook. It's a really tough spot for Jan. So Jan just plays queen e3, just sliding up a square, defending the center a little bit, and now Magnus kind of drops back with the queen. Every move, it feels like this game, is like a one mover. One square, one square, one square. This move was one square. This move was one square, right? It's like everybody's just sliding a little bit. Just everybody. It's like a little delicate dance at the highest of levels, right? So now we get rook b1, but not the same rook b1. This is rook eb1, and he's looking to do something on the b file, right? So now we have knight e5, de5, knight g4, and the position's spicy. It's getting a little spicy. Knight is hitting two things here. b7 could be a liability. Jan slides back with the queen, which is... It seems odd, it seems like more natural to play something like queen f4, but the truth is, the simplest of h5s, now, defending, and, I mean, he's fine. If you try to play f3 to kick the knight out, the knight happily goes away, and then reroutes back to the middle, and what are these pieces doing here, right? Like, the knight has no moves. If the knight goes to c1, attacking the queen, okay, hi. King h2, rook d1, hi, it's mate. Like, you're gonna get mated. Like, it's over. So, in general, if you have 5 pieces and 13 points of material is on the first rank, you're just not going to win. I mean, Magnus has that, but at least his pieces, you see, there's a difference. The rooks control almost 2 entirely open files. White's rooks are in jail, basically. So, knight g4 is played, queen back to e1, and h5. And Magnus is allowing the capture on b7 to come with tempo. Only Magnus Carlsen can do that. I mean, only the, you know, only the creme de la creme of the strong players can allow such a capture to occur, because they understand that now the bishop has wandered far away. Rook a4 is coming. Magnus saw rook a4 and he really liked it. We got rook b1 and rook a4 in the same game. That's how you know it's going to be a good one. And now, you know, now it's a really tough spot, because how do you defend this? How do you defend this? Well, if you play rook e4, for example, then comes rook b8, and you kind of blocked your bishop's path, right? So that doesn't make sense. Knight d2, knight a5, hang a knight. If you play rook c1, you solve one problem and open up a new one. So that doesn't work. You can play f3 because you watched my videos and you know about danger levels, but now the same problem exists. So, okay, well, okay. If rook a4 is played and nobody can protect the pawn, and we can't do danger levels, of course you just push it. Duh, that's what you do. You play c5. Get the pawn out of the way. Easy peasy. Next move, the bishop comes back and you're just the pawn up. Which is exactly what Jan played. And c5 loses. c5 loses the game. Did you not expect this 23 minutes into this video? I mean, maybe you already saw the game and you just watched the recaps because you're awesome and you just want to support me, and I appreciate that very much. But if you haven't and you were not expecting that at all, yeah. c5 is losing after the move c6. And the bishop is trapped. And I don't know how that was missed. I don't know what was missed. I don't know how it was missed. c5 was played after 4 minutes of thought. At this point, I was looking at what Anish was saying, and he was... I mean, some of the commentary I was seeing around the streams was wild. I mean, it was like, this is the craziest collapse in recent chess history. Yeah. And I would end the recap here, but I won't. I will still show a couple of instructive things. It's over because you just cannot prevent the bishop from getting swarmed. Like, you just can't prevent it. We get f3, knight h6. By the way, the move f3 was played after 19 minutes. I mean, there was some suspicion that Jan just, like, went outside and was like, what if I just go to the airport? I'm joking. Obviously not. I mean, he's been a class act this entire match. He shows up to every press conference. At the time of recording, I don't know if he's shown up to this one. I really hope they can give him a break. But he really has been a class act, even in the most difficult of defeats. You know, he came back and he went for a trade, and, you know, Magnus swarms the bishop. Jan has to do something, right? So he plays rook b6. This is kind of interesting. The only good thing about this position for Jan is he has what's known as an outside pass pawn, an A or H pawn, and he has some good support behind it with a knight and a pawn. At the end of the day, Magnus very calmly kind of brings the knight back, absorbs the pressure, and here even calls the bluff. He understands that there are no clear ways to move forward here, so he takes a pawn for good measure. And, you know, if Jan just kind of runs forward like this, there's no way to coordinate. You can't get your knight to these two squares to remove the rook. You can play knight b7, and then I will play something like, I mean, I don't know, I can probably just go back to f5. So now you cannot even, you cannot get to b6. There's nothing you can do. So, yeah, I mean, we have knight a4, which is an interesting idea. Great move here by Magnus. c5, activating the bishop on this diagonal, also giving the pawn back. And we have a7. And after rook back to a8, Jan resigned. Fabiano here was showing one funny line. Bishop c6, rook b1. This is what you do when you kind of get bored. Rook d2, allowing like kind of promotion to occur. Knight b7, bishop f3, a8 queen. And despite allowing promotion, there is unstoppable checkmate on the g2 square, which would have been cool if it happened, but it did not. Rook a8, Jan resigns. Magnus is up 6-3 with 5 games to go. Jan must now score 4 out of 5 in a match where he hasn't won a game. And what to say? I mean, the haircut was fresh. The day off seemed to do him well. He got a very complicated and imbalanced game. And I mean, damn it, Magnus Carlsen has some secret back alley Norwegian setups against everything. Like, I've never seen this. I've never seen this approach to this position. The earliest of d4s. I mean, it was even so obscure that here the computer was trying to say you can play like this to put the knight on f5 instead of f6 to support it was how it's unbelievable. It's absolutely fascinating the way he played this in the move order that he employed to kind of like bring the bishop like an elastic band and use this knight as a target and then kind of like do this. I mean, breaking all principles. He's making 2 moves with pieces in the opening despite not being castled, just reacting to the way Jan is playing, but he does it. And he's up 6-3, and what can you say? Is it over? Probably. Unfortunately, there's no stopping of a match, stopping of a fight, you know, that kind of a thing. I mean, there is Kasparov-Karpov, the first one, but that's not going to happen nowadays, so I really want to see Jan win a game, man. I mean, I really do. I really was hoping this was it, but Magnus is up 6-3. Before we go, I was actually going to talk about this in the intro, but for the people that made it to this point in the recap, only like 25 to 30% of you do. Most people don't have the attention span, or they have to come back 3 or 4 times. I just want to say I really do apologize for clickbaiting you yesterday. I did not even realize that if I named a video Disaster for Magnus, which was the original title without a year or anything, and a modern thumbnail, that it can be interpreted as the World Championship match. I honestly just wanted to cover an old game. And it turns out I already covered that old game. I had forgotten about that. It was just a bad day to be a YouTuber in my life. And I accidentally called Ivanchuk Russian, apparently. I mean, it was just a trifecta of idiocy. So I'm sorry. But you'll only know that if you made it this far. Anyway, I will see you tomorrow for the potential final... No, it won't be the potential final round, because Magnus needs 7.5, but... It's a shame, and I'm a little bit sad, but recaps keep going, life keeps going, Magnus Carlsen keeps going, and so does Jan, and I will see you all for game number 10.